Welcome to Bengals Central Podcast, a podcast about your Cincinnati Bengals, brought to you by ProFootballCentral.com. And now your host, Sean O'Donnell and Chris Rowling. Take it away, guys.
Welcome to the inaugural episode of the Bengals Central Podcast. My name is Sean O'Donnell, and I am here with my co-host, Chris Rowling. I don't know about you, Chris, but I am excited about what we have in store today.
Absolutely, Sean. We've got a loaded opening show today. We're going to be talking about every round of the Bengals' exceptional 2013 draft, and we also have a special guest for our Bengals fans out there, and second-year receiver Mohamed Sanu, who will be joining us later. For those of you who don't know, my name is Chris, and I'm a Bengals featured columnist over at Bleacher Report. You can also find me at Fansite, at Yahoo, and more. Feel free to hit me up on Twitter at Chris Rowling. The space is actually an underscore. Let me know what you think of our show.
And I am Sean O'Donnell. I am also a Bengals featured columnist on Bleacher Report, and you can find me on Twitter at Sean O'Donnell NFL. I'm always out there looking to talk Bengals, NFL, or just some random nonsense. So please feel free, find me, find Chris, and talk to us. So this is basically going to bring us into our main topic of conversation for the evening, which is the 2013 NFL Draft. What a great time to have the first ever show of Bengals Central right after the draft has happened. It gives us so much to talk about. There's been so much going on this offseason in terms of free agency and then filling the roster with just such talent both offensively and defensively. So let's just get right into it. Chris, we spoke a little bit earlier before the show, and we both were in agreement about what the Bengals really needed to accomplish with the 2013 NFL Draft, the positions that they really needed to shore up to be a contender going into this next season. Go ahead and let's break down those positions and what they mean to the Bengals going into 2013.
Yeah, that's right. I think it was pretty common knowledge for everyone, not just ourselves, where the Bengals really needed to hit. One being running back. Ben Jarvis Green Ellis isn't exactly a home run hitter, and you saw that several times last season when he had massive holes and got 5 yards. You have linebacker. They added James Harrison. Not sure how that's exactly going to work, and they also, the fans will love this, they brought back Ray Malaluga, but that weak side linebacker spot's still a little bit of an unknown. Thomas Howard's still out there in free agency, so they needed to hit that. Strong safety next to Reggie Nelson was a big weakness last year. Taylor Mays couldn't stop hitting his own teammates, let alone play the pass or run, so they needed to hit that one as well. So I guess we could just parlay that right into exactly what they hit and if they hit it correctly.
Absolutely. So yeah, you're you hit the nail right on the head there with the deficiencies and the holes that Cincinnati had in its roster. They didn't really do much as far as free agency in terms of signing their own players to maintain the core of their team, but it seems that was Marvin Lewis and company's goal basically throughout the entire offseason. They made a couple outside signings, Josh Johnson, John Skelton, James Harrison, but no real big name impact players that some Bengals fans were looking for. And maybe we'll touch on that a little bit later as far as why they didn't go that route, in terms of the roster that they have intact already, maybe what they're planning on doing with the money that they currently have left over in cap space, and and their plans on building a young core through the draft. So and speaking of the draft, let's what do you think, Chris? Let's get down to it.
Absolutely. In round one, they went and they shocked everyone with the tight end at number 21 overall, Tyler Eifert out of Notre Dame. And, in my mind, that was the pick. As I was watching it live, we got to about pick 15, and I started, saying that was the pick they were going to make because Marvin Lewis is infamous for going best player available. And at 21, at this point in the draft, you're not going to get a player that's usually the best player at his position by a long shot. that speaks to both to how bad this draft really was and how good Eifert really is. Obviously on the field he creates a lot of mismatches because now they can run 2 tight end sets with Jermaine Gresham. But the other thing is Gresham has one more year after this one on his contract, so Eifert's a little bit of a nudge in the right direction for Gresham, who kind of fell flat on his face in the postseason last year against the Texans when he was the focal point of the offense. So.
Yeah, you hit the nail on the head right there. Eifert, he's going to push Gresham in the right direction. Gresham, as we know, struggled with drops like crazy last season. He's an inconsistent blocker in line. He was called for numerous holding penalties last year, false starts. I think he was one of the most penalized tight ends in the league last year. And, it's for an offense that, relies on, should I say, matriculating the ball down the field, creating those, short to intermediate plays. A 10-yard holding penalty means the world to a team like that. It's you really can't afford those mistakes. And, Eifert was a great addition being brought in to kind of push him, if not to complement him in the tight end role. And I read something just briefly from Jay Gruden, the Bengals offensive coordinator, and he was quoted to say, "We're not the New England Patriots." That was his quote, which, he basically was going out and saying there, we're not looking to use the 2 tight end set all the time like the Patriots do and create mismatches that way. We're not. That's not us. He said, he has a scheme in place that he is very confident with, that he can find a role for Eifert in. So I guess I'm going to ask you this question, Chris, because I had my own thoughts about it. But what's your take basically on Jay Gruden's thought process there, and saying that he really doesn't want to use Eifert with Gresham on the field as a 2 tight end set? More or less, I guess he's looking to kind of spell them out. So he says he has his own identity. He doesn't want to go across, and use the Patriots type of scheme. How do you feel about that?
Right. Well, first of all, I think Jay Gruden's a very smart man. They're not the Patriots because they don't have a Tom Brady. They have an Andy Dalton. So I think, first of all, everything's coach speak at this point. But, yeah, I think what we saw a lot of last year was Gresham splitting out as a wide receiver and still having another tight end in on the line. So they won't necessarily do, always hit the 2 tight end sets. But I get where he's coming from. And realistically, on the offense that he runs, it wouldn't make sense to run it as much as the Patriots do. Because, again, you do have a quarterback that's limited and is still developing that arm and that decision-making process in a passing game that relies on short and intermediate routes.
That's right on the money. That's right on the money. And for those of you who don't know, the man who just spoke was Chris Rowling, and he knows his stuff. So, let's move on from Tyler Eifert here, and let's go on to the Bengals' next pick of the draft here, which another offensive weapon for Cincinnati at the 37th overall pick in the early second round. The last pick, I must say, from the tremendous Carson Palmer trade, which Bengals coaching staff, front office fans, everyone's pretty much thankful for that trade, I guess, at this time, because Carson Palmer for last year's first round pick Drake Kirkpatrick, and now this year's second round selection Giovanni Bernard, running back from North Carolina, making up the second selection of the Carson Palmer trade. When we got to this portion of the draft, there was rumors leaking out like crazy about the Bengals. First of all, Marvin Lewis came out and said, it looks like we're going to take a running back today. He just kind of came out and said it, but no one was really sure what running back they were going towards. I heard rumors that they were really into Eddie Lacy. Other people, lots of us actually were really high on Jonathan Franklin. I was one of those people. Nobody really knew where they were going with it, but they ended up going Giovanni Bernard in the early second round. And he's a playmaker all the way around. He not only is a really versatile running back who can contribute as a terrific pass catcher out of the backfield, who has shown some great flashes in pass protection as well, and who also doubles as a punt returner. I mean, they're kind of getting the whole package in this guy. He should be a great compliment coming in for BenJarvis Green-Ellis, who's kind of the between-the-tackles guy. You bring in, Bernard, who has a bit more speed. He can get to the edge. He can be a reliable guy catching the ball. He can give Dalton another security blanket, another kind of check down guy, and he's the home run threat that they've been looking for. A guy that can get into space and that can actually hit a hole and turn it into something, and not just fall forward for 5 yards, as you mentioned earlier about incumbent starter BenJarvis Green-Ellis. What's your take on Bernard, Chris?
Well, I think probably the folks that were supporting Bernard and not Franklin were probably right in that regard. Bernard did end up being the first running back off the board, and the Packers stole Franklin at 125. So apparently Marvin Lewis knows something that we don't. Bernard, you pretty much covered it all when it comes to him. He's a guy last year put up 1,200 rushing yards on the ground, 600 more receiving through the air. I mean, they were looking for Bernard Scott to be that presence last season, and he went down with that ACL injury, and I don't think that's something they want to play with, in regards to Scott anymore, because he's going on 30 now, believe it or not. And so, Bernard is going to, I don't know if they're actually going to use him on punt returns or kick returns a lot, because I think they're going to feature him more than we probably think. And there's no risk in injuring him when you have guys like Adam Jones, Andrew Hawkins. But, I mean, Dalton has needed that presence out of the backfield in this type of offense, and he simply has not had it. Bernard is already up past, guys like Cedric Pearman on the depth chart. I don't know if he's the number one guy per se, because if you want to get into fantasy football real quick, I think Green-Ellis is going to hawk a lot of touchdowns from Giovanni Bernard next year in short yardage situations. He was one of the best in the NFL. So I think you're going to see more of a committee approach still, but Bernard, I mean, for the value right here, they didn't reach on him in the first round. They got their guy that they needed for their offense, and I think Andy Dalton is going to be the biggest beneficiary of this pick.
Well said. Yeah, you hit the nail right on the head there with Giovanni Bernard. Time will tell. One more question on Bernard for you, and as we know, the Bengals don't have a great history in taking running backs that have injury relations. Let's say that. We've seen our fair share of Kajana Carter-esque running backs, coming out and lately, remember Kenny Irons, Chris Perry, and even Bernard Scott we can put in this list. Giovanni Bernard had a torn ACL in 2010. How much do you think? How troubling is that?
I think that's not something that weighs on their decision-making in the front office, I can tell you that. All the fans were wincing with each name you just listed, though. I don't think it's that big of a deal. I think that was a while ago. And, especially in this where they're not asking him to be a workhorse, but more of maybe a committee-type back where his touches are going to be lower. I don't think it's that big of a concern, but I guess we'll have to wait and see.
Makes total sense. I love it. So let's keep moving along here. Then the Bengals certainly had a good amount of draft selections this year, so we plenty of guys to get through, and we're still in the second round with their second round selection at 53 overall. They selected Margus Hunt, defensive end from Southern Methodist. And this is the pick right here that began controversy, I think, like crazy throughout Bengals fans, across the country. Some were loving this pick. Some were absolutely hating it. Where were you when Margus Hunt was picked, Chris, and what were your initial thoughts?
I wasn't shocked. I had a defensive end or defensive tackle for them, in the first 3 rounds, somewhere in the first 3 rounds. And, he's a guy with unlimited potential. And, this is what Marvin Lewis and defensive coordinator Mike Zimmer are infamous for is, bringing in a rotation of guys that just wear down offensive lines over the course of the game. We've seen it in the past. Guys like John Fanene and Frosty Rucker have looked great in that rotation in Cincinnati and then went on to start, and now they're not even in the league. I think Hunt has more potential than all those guys, but, they saw him work out at the Senior Bowl and all those types of things, so they obviously wanted to add to that rotation, and I think based on potential and let him learn from guys like Dunlap and Gathers. I mean, it makes sense at this point when you have an extra pick.
Yeah, you're absolutely right there, and especially the point that it's really you've got an extra second round pick there. So why not go for a guy that might be a slightly high risk pick, but the reward can be exponential. You look at a guy like Margus Hunt. I mean, he's just a tremendous physical specimen, and he could really wreak some havoc on that great rotation on the Bengals defensive line. And the thing that I really like about this pick, and I thought about it right away when they took him, and it kind of made me a fan of the pick right away, is the fact that Michael Johnson right now is currently playing under the franchise tag, and Carlos Dunlap is a free agent in 2014. So you've got two, tremendous, probably the two best defensive ends, that are playing for the Cincinnati Bengals right now, whose futures with the team are kind of questionable after the coming season. So, it just makes too much sense to bring in another defensive end here who could learn this year. I don't expect Hunt to be used, as much as a guy like Dunlap will be on the defensive line, but he'll be fit in the rotation. He'll get his repetitions. But to groom a guy like this, it makes too much sense. With Dunlap, as he's had his injury concerns, Michael Johnson. I mean, yes, he had 11.5 sacks last year, but he was actually kind of a streaky player. He was inconsistent. He had some great games last year, like his game against Washington. He was phenomenal, and then he had games where he couldn't find the backfield to save his life. I think that's one of the big reasons why the Bengals opted a franchise tag him this year instead of, give him a long-term contract. And I think, that just increases the intelligence of the Margus Hunt pick.
Yeah, and this is what the best franchises do. They find their future potential replacements at a quality spot years in advance. It's the same thing they did in the first round with Eifert, if it gets to that point.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. That's how great teams stay great, really, and and the Bengals are finally in position to be able to do that, which is terrific for this franchise, because really, when's the last time you could legitimately say that about the Bengals franchise?
It's been a while.
Yeah, it's been a long time. Yeah. So let's keep it going then. Another player that should be able to provide a pretty significant impact very early in his career, most likely in his rookie season, was taken in the third round. 84th overall selection. We have Sean Williams, safety from Georgia. And, I got to say, Sean Williams here, it's the Bengals waited, till round 3 to get their safety because, they had their guys, lined up in front of them in round 2. It's just the way, the cards fell. And I actually, to tell you the truth, heard that they had Sean Williams actually very high on their draft board. So to the Bengals, this was an absolute steal of a pick right here. And, I think a lot of people were kind of confused over this pick because Bakari Rambo is the sexy pick coming out of Georgia at safety. That's the name that everybody was hearing. And for whatever reason, Williams wasn't getting that kind of publicity coming out there. But Williams, he's such he's a durable guy. He's a tough player. He's a hard hitter. He's great in the box. He's great in run support at going after the quarterback. And albeit, he's not the fastest guy with great closing speed, to be kind of like a deep center fielder kind of guy. He doesn't really need to be right off the bat because Reggie Nelson, I think, encompasses that for the Bengals. And, although Sean Williams, he doesn't have tremendously stiff hips, and I think he can learn from Reggie Nelson. I think he can get coached up, under Mark Carrier and the other guys in the secondary. What are your thoughts, Chris, on, Sean Williams and how he will impact Cincinnati in his rookie season?
Well, remember, this is the kid that was ranked the number 1 safety going into last year, and then he had a little bit of a down year and wasn't exactly a star on that defense compared to some of the other names. But, I was admittedly one of those folks clamoring for Rambo, and then he almost fell out of the draft, if I remember correctly. So, Williams, to me, I heard Joe Greedy of the Cincinnati Enquirer have a report that he's already penciled in as a starter, or is going to be with the way he plays. And, he's your prototypical in-the-box strong safety to me, especially in the Cincinnati defense. I think, he's not great against the pass, but he is athletic enough to maybe help out against tight ends, which has been the Achilles heel for the Cincinnati Bengals defense since forever.
Absolutely.
Good.
I'm sorry, keep going. I was actually in agreement with you there. I was giving you the old amen. Anytime you hear, Cincinnati Bengals and lack of tight end coverage, man, it just, kind of sends chills down your spine. It's been so atrocious.
Yeah.
But, please continue.
Houston in the playoffs the past couple of years. Yeah. Owen Daniel. Familiar name. Williams, he's going to come in. I think he's a starter right away. He's more intelligent than Taylor Mays. I'm not sure that that's a hard thing to accomplish, but he'll be good against the run, and, Zimmer and the company will coach him up, and I think, that might be the best pick they've made in the draft so far.
Yeah, and that's a bold statement right there, and you could absolutely be right, and I really love what you had to say about the fact that you're right. A year ago, this was a super hot prospect at the safety position. So for the Bengals to nab him in the late third round, this could turn out to be one of the best deals of the draft if he can live up to his potential and play an entire season starting at strong safety or for the Bengals. The deeper you can go in the draft and get starters out of it, obviously you're doing something right?
Absolutely. He's, when you have a defense that has only one hole and the class is this deep, you can afford to wait until the third round. And if that third round turns out to be a starter, that's probably going to be your best pick in the draft, I would think.
Yeah, absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more on that one. And, speaking of that defense that, that doesn't have many holes, our fourth round pick brings us to the first linebacker taken by Cincinnati in the draft. In fact, the only linebacker taken in the draft, which is Sean Porter from Texas A&M at the 118th overall selection. And as we know, the Bengals brought back Ray Malaluga, and from the reports that we're hearing, he should be staying in the middle again this year, which leaves Vontaze Burfict on the weak side, and the Bengals then brought in former Pittsburgh Steeler James Harrison on the strong side. And, I'm sure there's going to be other guys like Emmanuel Lemur that will be, spelling guys out in certain packages, but another guy that could possibly get involved here, and maybe not as a starter, but, in certain substitutions, in certain schemes to utilize himself to his strength is Sean Porter, the lanky linebacker from Texas A&M. Chris, what do you think about the Sean Porter pick?
I think he's another insurance pick in the mold of, Eifert and the other guys we've talked about, because Thomas Howard was still a free agent, and I think sooner rather than later you're going to see Burfitt move to the middle. I still think that's a possibility this offseason, but we'll see how camps play out. They do love Malaluga's presence as a leader, but to me, Porter's he's your prototypical WLB, pass, run, whatever it is, blitz. He's got it, especially in a 4-3 formation. I don't think he's ready to contribute right away, but on a special teams basis, he could have an impact.
Yeah, you're absolutely right. I think Sean Porter can be the type of the type of linebacker that the Bengals were kind of hoping they had, in guys like Dante Moak and things like that. Porter, he's a quick linebacker. He's a lanky linebacker. He's very athletic. I think he can translate to the weak side. I think really well. And you're right. I think it's a great insurance pick here. I think when and it's not if when Vontaze Burfict does make the switch over into the middle, you're going to need a guy to play the weak side, especially if Howard isn't brought back in. I think that's where Porter comes into play then. What do you think about that? Is that pretty much on par with how you're thinking?
Yeah, we're on par. If Howard comes back, if and when, we'll see. We don't even know if he's back to form. It's been a while since he was the Bengals' best linebacker. But, even if you can bring him in and have Porter learn from Howard, I mean, you made a good pick in the 4th round then.
Absolutely. You know, it seems to be kind of an ongoing thing. It's you know, we're through 4 rounds here of draft analysis for Cincinnati, and you know, for every pick here, we're either looking at immediate starters or at least immediate contributors in some phase of the game, and all of these guys, you know, are looking to be future starters. So, you know, we've gone through. We have 5 guys that we have now gone over here, you know, and we're looking at 5 potentially impactful players, you know, for the long term for the Cincinnati Bengals. So it looks like they're off to a great start right here, you know, for the 2013 NFL Draft.
Yeah, I'll let you take this away, but I'll just say that ends in round 5. I promise.
yeah, you know, maybe, you know, I think you're right there. So without further ado, let's go ahead and into the back half of the draft, and you know, I think there's, to sum up the back half of the draft, you know, there's a lot of mixed feelings here. Some of these picks, maybe we could have done without. Maybe we could have gone in a different direction. Some of these picks, you know, we're looking at, hey, you know, there could be some long-term potential here, even though there's really nothing right away. We're looking at some developmental players. Maybe they can contribute later on. Well, we'll get to all of that, I guess. Let's delve into round 5, shall we? We have one pick in round 5, which is at 156 overall, and that is former Kansas tackle Tanner Hawkinson. You know, Chris, I'm going to let you just go ahead and have at it with this one.
Well, I thought this was a guy that would go undrafted, and I don't know if he can actually play tackle at the NFL level, but, you know, I hated the pick, and I think everyone did, and especially it doesn't make a lot of sense with the quality linemen the Bengals already have on the roster, but I will say the more research I did when the draft finally ended, the more I started to less hate it, if that makes sense, because back in 2008, Marvin Lewis and everybody dipped into the Kansas well for an offensive tackle in round 4, and his name was Anthony Collins. And he's turned out to be the best backup offensive lineman the Bengals have. He started a game for Andre Smith last season, I believe, and the offense didn't skip a beat, and they weren't trying to protect him or anything. So this just may be the crazy in me speaking, but Marvin Lewis, I've noticed a trend. He enjoys dipping into wells he is comfortable with, which is why you always see him going to Georgia. So I think maybe at this position in the draft, he saw a Kansas tackle, and, you know, it made sense.
Yeah, you know, I see where you're coming from on that one. I really do. And, you know, and yeah, I like you, pre-draft, I had Hawkinson going undrafted as well. I thought that, you know, he'd be an undrafted free agent, and, you know, he'd get picked up by some team, and, you know, he'd struggle to try to make a practice squad somewhere, and then lo and behold, his name gets calls in round 5. And you're right about the possibility of not being able to play tackle at the NFL level. For one, you know, for a guy who's 6'5", you know, he has relatively shorter arms, and you know, he's not an overly athletic player. And I really think that, you know, you put those two things together, and what that means to me is that he's really going to struggle with some of the quicker and lengthier defensive ends in the NFL. Like, you know, if you put a guy like, let's say, you know, our current Bengal, Michael Johnson, if you put him across from a guy like Tanner Hawkinson, I mean, Hawkinson's just going to get burned all day long. Maybe not because he's a bad player. In fact, I've heard that he's kind of a technician on the line, and that's one of his positives. But just I think he's really limited by you know, just by his physical aspects of himself. I think that's the problem that they're going to run into here. And, you know, and who knows, maybe they found a really good long-term backup. I certainly don't think that would be a major loss in the 5th round of the draft, even if he ends up, you know, backing up at guard. But yeah, you're right. I you know, it's kind of a baffling pick in round 5, though, I think. So with that being said,
yeah.
You know, do you have anything else on Tanner Hawkinson, or have we exhausted that guy now?
I think we've exhausted it until they make another offensive tackle pick in the 7th round.
I think so too. So before we get to that, we've got two more guys to go over. And I'm kind of excited to get to that guy in the 7th round as well. I think he was my favorite second half of the draft pick. But I think we both like this guy. But first let's talk about a guy that I don't know about you, but I actually really like. And that was the first 6th round pick at 190th overall. It's former Nebraska running back Rex Burkhead. And this pick came to was to the surprise of many Bengals fans. However, really not a surprise to me. I really saw them double dipping at running back the entire way through this draft. Brian Leonard, they weren't going to re-sign him. Bernard Scott, they brought back on a 1-year deal at very minimum wage. I highly doubt he makes the 53-man roster. Cedric Pierman, I could see him sticking around, obviously, because of his tremendous talent and what he brings to special teams. And then, obviously, Benjarvis Green-Ellis. Dan Herron, yes, he has his moments on special teams last year. I don't know if it's enough for him to stick around. But to a guy that could maybe actually make the 53-man roster and contribute, I think Burkhead may be that guy. Everything you read about this guy is what a hard worker he is and how reliable he is and what a great overall athlete he is and a great running back. He's well-rounded. He can run with the ball. He's good vision. He can catch out of the backfield. He's a really good blocker. You hear all these great things about Rex Burkhead, and it's kind of hard not to get a little bit excited over him, knowing that he was 190th selection in the draft. And a lot of people are saying he can kind of be the second coming of Brian Leonard as that third down back, for Cincinnati. What's your take on Burkhead? Are you liking him as much as me, as far as value goes here, or are you kind of in a different mindset?
Well, I wasn't necessarily thinking they'd take another back because you have Bernard, who I think is going to act very well as a fair down back. But it makes sense, and I think it's a great value pick here because he essentially is a Brian Leonard clone in that role. And I think, like you were saying, I think he's a lock to make the final roster because not only did they lose Brian Leonard, but they lost, Leonard's over in Tampa Bay now, but they lost Dan Scooter to the 49ers, and that's two of their special teams aces. So I think Burkhead is one of those guys, speaking of that hard working you were talking about, I think he's really going to prove himself on special teams and, eventually work his way into a rotation, yeah, but I think he's going to make his money on special teams, especially with, a few of the key guys gone on probably the most underrated unit in football. So,
you know what, that was perfect. And you brought up a great point with the loss of Dan Scooter to the Niners. The Cincinnati Bengals are obviously going to need, guys to step up and fill their special team spots. In fact, that was one of the very first things that they did over the offseason was bolster back their special teams units. They brought Huber back on a deal. They brought Nugent back. They brought their two gunners back in Andrew Hawkins and Jeremy Miles. Vincent Ray they brought back, who's a special teams guy, and also Cedric Pierman. So now you got a guy like Rex Burkhead, who you said can absolutely contribute on special teams in the way that Scooter did and kind of fill that Leonard type role with his work ethic. And that makes absolute perfect sense for this pick right here. And so far, I'll say it again, we're going through the list here, and, maybe not so much for round 5, but for the rest of it, the Bengals are looking in pretty good shape for the 2013 draft. So let's go ahead and move along here to round 6. We've got a wide receiver now, Kobe Hamilton, formerly of Arkansas, at 197th overall. And round 6, the Bengals wait until their second pick in the 6th round to take a wide receiver. Some people were really wanting wide receiver early in the draft for the Bengals. And this. We've laughed about this actually, and I'm sorry if one of the listeners here are one of those people. I'm not laughing at you, just the idea, because I think it would be terrible. With all of the other needs that the Bengals had, and all of the great selections that we've really gone over so far. I mean, I really couldn't think of trading any one of these guys that Cincinnati had picked this far in the draft for a wide receiver that was available in that same position. I think the Bengals are dead set in wide receiver. They were terrific last year when our soon-to-be guest, actually, on the show, Mohamed Sanu, stepped in around the middle of the season. I mean, the passing attack became tremendous. The pressure was taken off A.J. Green. Another weapon was added for Andy Dalton. And Sanu, 4 touchdowns in 3 games, obviously a valuable red zone target, super versatile. Marvin Jones, the 5th rounder from last year, was really coming along towards the end of the season. And now you add in Eifert and Bernard, throw in Andrew Hawkins. And, I mean, this could really be an explosive offense. I mean, the weapons are everywhere. And now you're adding another one in Kobe Hamilton right here in the 6th round. And I think it was wise for the Bengals to wait at wide receiver after, everybody that I've really just mentioned on there. I really don't see what guy you're going to take out of that lineup right there to plug in a rookie wide receiver. So I like waiting on receiver here with Hamilton, who's a guy that can develop and, maybe make the practice squad and can, learn a couple things. And, he could be a guy who could step in as maybe a number 4 guy or something like that in the future. And and contribute here and there in the offensive scheme. What are your thoughts on Kobe Hamilton, Chris?
Well, I think what you're seeing in Hamilton is they want a little more speed maybe out of the slot. Hawkins is a fast guy, but he's more of a gadget guy. Jones and Sanu aren't necessarily speed guys. That said, I don't know if Hamilton makes the roster because not only the guys you named, but remember, they still have reliable targets like Ryan Whalen and Dane Sanzenbacher on the roster. And the undrafted class is intriguing as well with people like Roy Roundtree and Tyrone Gord. So, Hamilton is one of those developmental guys. I think, maybe in the slot in a few years I could see it, especially if someone gets hurt or doesn't work out. But this was probably the worst pick in my mind, I would think, one of them at least. And, he could develop, but I think, like you said, they're already so stacked at this position that there wasn't really a point in drafting one high. And I get taking one this late, especially with extra picks based on potential, and that's fine. But, I mean, I see him on practice squad at best.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm right there with you. And I think we're pretty much both in agreement here that, that was the right thing to do, I think, for the Bengals is, to not go after a wide receiver because, they think it was necessary because it obviously wasn't. So let's move on to the last round, the 7th round. And as we know, the Bengals did not have a draft pick in the 2nd round. However, they were awarded 2 compensatory selections in the very late 7th round, which I believe that they used very wisely. One of my favorite picks of the draft is coming up next, and that would be the 240th overall selection in round 7, offensive tackle from Ohio State, Reed Fraggle. And I was enamored when this name came up on the board during the draft. For one, I kind of, was in and out of paying attention, in the late rounds here. I kind of paid more attention when the Bengals came on the clock. I thought this guy was long gone already. I really did. And when his name came up in the 7th round, I couldn't believe it. This was a guy that I was mocking him to the Bengals in the 5th round, for the better part of a month or 2 before the draft. And I don't think it's because I was an idiot. I really did think he went that high, that he would go that high. But the 7th round just makes him just a tremendous value here for the Bengals. A converted tight end. Urban Meyer asked him to switch to the tackle position to help out the offense, which he did. I mean, he showed some great smarts. He made the transition really well because he was more of a blocking tight end, in his junior year, so he kind of knew what it was like to block on the edge already. He's got a really good frame. He's got an athletic frame, but he's got I guess a frame that has potential to fill out, to gain weight, and to provide a better anchor at the NFL level. So I think with some with some weight room training, some weight gaining, and some work with the offensive line, I think Reed Fraggle is really a developmental guy that could turn out to be a starter at right tackle at the NFL level one day. What's your take on him?
Well, this is the seventh rounder who could make the final roster this year. In my mind, strictly because of how the Cincinnati Bengals operate their offense, at least how they've done it in the past, is they like to bring in an extra offensive tackle who's eligible to catch passes. That would normally be Dennis Rowland, but now you have Fraggle here, who is a converted tight end and has already shown that he can be an effective blocker as a starter in the Big Ten. So what you have now is you replace Rowland with Fraggle, who is also a very adept pass catcher, and he's played most of his career as a tight end, and all of a sudden that versatility, I think, makes him a lock for the roster, especially in those types of situations. So, this late in the draft, this is the only way players make the roster, is if they can serve more than one purpose. And I think so, especially down on, say, the goal line, they put in Fraggle, maybe Green Ellis is in the backfield. You think that they're going to run it up the gut or, whatever. But really, you have another offensive lineman who can split out, and he's actually a converted tight end. And, it just adds another level to these schemes and these wrinkles on the offense that they're trying to develop. And, I've heard people say in 3 to 4 years he could develop to be maybe an Andrew Whitworth replacement. And, that's fine, but I think for right now you have someone that can contribute immediately in maybe some very, very important situations.
Yeah, that's absolutely spot on right there, and I love the fact that you're mentioning that Fraggle could turn out to be another one of those kind of gadget type players, which I'm a huge fan of. You bring in either the on balance line or the goal line package where he's an eligible receiver. And, on a third and short or something like that, why not, run a play action and see what you've got if he can, scoot out into the flat and get open. And, it's in the seventh round, really, what do you have to lose at that point? And, and you hit the nail on the head. You can't really do much better than that. You got a seventh round pick, and you've got a guy who's real versatile and has a great shot of making the roster because of it. So we've got one more pick to go over. So the last pick of the draft for the Bengals, also in the seventh round, 251st overall, former South Carolina center, T.J. Johnson. So T.J. Johnson is our last guy that we're going over here. T.J. Johnson, who spent a lot of his time blocking for Marcus Lattimore for the Gamecocks. I know that Johnson had some nice workouts. He did very well at the combine. He's kind of a workout warrior type guy. How much do you know about Johnson, Chris? Because I haven't really gotten very in depth on him as far as his versatility goes. Is he stuck at center, or is he a guy like that will be able to maybe transition to the guard spots as well? Because the Bengals might be lacking a little bit of depth there right now, or maybe need a little bit of competition at those spots.
Well, I think he could bounce around to a guard position if they asked him to. But as far as, he's spent his whole career as a center. And I don't know, for someone that was maybe 3 or 4 picks, I can't remember off the top of my head, away from being Mr. Irrelevant, this pick probably angered me a little more than it should have, because I love what the Bengals have at center position already, especially because of Trevor Robinson. I think this is a guy they maybe keep around on a practice squad, and, like you said, they don't have amazing depth at guards, so maybe they'll try him there. But I don't know. He's a weird prospect because he wasn't covered a lot. But like you said, he had some, apparently outstanding workouts, which sometimes makes all the difference, I guess, in this regard. It stopped him from going undrafted.
Yeah, I guess it means something, right?
Absolutely.
All right, so that concludes all of the Bengals draft selections from 2013. So let's just do this real quick, Chris. Let's look at let's take one player each and just kind of go down the list here and and let's give our value pick, worst pick, sleeper pick, for the Bengals 2013 draft, and explain what we have as far as our selection goes and why. And I'll start this out here for our best value picks here. And I've been gloating about this guy the whole time. I love him. Reed Fraggle. Value, getting this guy in the late 7th round, in the compensatory picks, which is, as you said with Johnson, is basically like going undrafted almost. This is a guy who's, I think, has a tremendous upside, who is a possibility of maybe even contributing a little bit off the bat, but is certainly a developmental guy, and I think he'll stick on the roster. And for a really late 7th rounder, I mean, that's a great thing to have, and I think he's my favorite in terms of value there.
Well, and, value for me, and I said it earlier, but it's the man in the first round, Tyler Eifert. And, anytime you can hit the absolute best player at their position, that I'd say late in the first round, that's a win-win. And, I mean, if you watch this kid on tape, his catch radius is unbelievable. He played in a pro-style offense where he was, an okay blocker, but he can split out, play wide receiver. I think with how this offense needed someone so desperately to step up last season, and it just could not be done, to take the pressure off of A.J. Green, I think, they found their guy in Eifert, and they addressed it immediately, and they knew they were okay to because they had 10 picks overall. So, to me, even though it was a first-round pick, that was the best value because he'll make the most difference right away, and, in terms of late first round, it's not going to get much better than that.
Nice. So let's keep it moving on then. Chris, who do you have as your worst pick of the draft?
I think you know.
I think I know too. I'll let you break the news on this one.
I believe his name is Tanner. He was selected in the 5th round, Mr. Tanner Hawkinson out of Kansas at 156. To me it didn't make a lot of sense because, and maybe the coaching staff knows a lot more than we do, and that tends to happen in some cases. Hawkinson, to me, he doesn't have a very bright future, and there's a chance he could prove us wrong, just like Anthony Collins did before him 5 years ago. But, for me, the worst pick in terms of value, it had to be him.
Yeah, I'm right there with you, and I'm sure everybody could probably tell before we even announced the name there, probably because of our coverage on him a little earlier when we were recapping the draft in the 5th round. But yeah, Tanner Hawkinson, and not to say that it was an absolutely terrible, horrible pick for the Bengals, but, the bulk of their draft were just so good, and this pick was just kind of the oddball to me. And, I hope you're right that, like Collins, he does end up proving us wrong. But for now, guilty till proven innocent, I guess it will be for Mr. Tanner Hawkinson. So our last category here, sleeper pick. So who's a guy who, might surprise some people this year? And I guess I'll bring my guy out first. And this is a guy that, again, I was gloating about a little bit earlier. It's Rex Burkhead. It's sleeper guy. Obviously, he's going to be picked in one of the latter rounds of the draft. You got Rex Burkhead at 190 overall in the 6th round. And, like you said, with his contributions possibly to special teams after the loss of Dan Skuta, and then what I'm thinking, as kind of a Brian Leonard replacement and his work ethic and being able to come in and contribute right away, I think he'll see plenty of special teams time. I think he'll even see a little bit of time in the offense this year. And, that's a lot to say for a running back who's taken in the 6th round. It really doesn't happen often, but I think this guy is a guy that has the potential to stick around with the Bengals for quite some time and to maintain a solid role and be a contributor on this team.
Yeah, well, I agree with everything you're saying. My sleeper pick is actually your best value pick, which probably says more about him than it says about us. Reed Fragile, to me, round 7, that's a sleeper pick because, like we were saying before, he's someone who can develop in the next 3 or 4 years into a starter when the time comes for someone like Whitworth to hang up the cleats. He's been playing tackle, I think it's for only 1 season, and he already proved at a Big Ten level that he can be pretty efficient at it. So you also add in the things we've been touching on in terms of his versatility, during an unbalanced line and goal situations and things like that. And I think he'll be a sleeper, if the term fits this year, because I think he'll make the roster as a 7th-round pick. But I also think down the line he'll be a sleeper because, you want to talk about unlimited potential. He can fill out his frame. He can work on his technique, learn from a guy like Whitworth, and then succeed him in, how many ever years it takes.
Nice, and that makes absolutely complete sense for a sleeper pick right there. And now, actually, we have a very special moment here in this inaugural episode of the Bengals Central podcast. We have our very first guest that we are bringing in with us right now, and he is none other than number 12, the Cincinnati Bengals wide receiver, Mohamed Sanu, who is on the line with us right now. And now the moment you all been waiting for. We have Mohamed Sanu, the wide receiver for Cincinnati Bengals, on the line with us on Bengals. Mohamed, thank you so much for joining us today. How you doing, man?
I'm doing fantastic. How are you guys doing?
We're doing great. We're very excited to have you on the show. Chris, take it away, my man.
Hey, we were just wondering, how's the health treating you after you went down last season with that injury?
I feel great. Body feels really, really well, and I've just been taking care of it and, working out, getting back into shape. I feel better than I did it last year, so it's just time to, get back to work and get everything full stride.
That's awesome. That's great to hear that you're working, man. You're really on a tear there last year. 4 touchdowns in a 3-game span before the untimely. It really looked like things were going great for you. Now that you're really healing up and getting back into the stride, what are your expectations for yourself for 2013?
I just expect, to play, all 16 regular season, including preseason games, and just to help the team in any way possible to be, a factor in the offense and just to make sure, we're playing well.
Very cool, very cool. So have you been working with any of the guys on the team yet this offseason? You been catching with Dalton or anything?
Well, we've been, off-season training together for a couple of weeks now, so we've all built chemistry, working together, working on the little details, and everybody looks good. Everybody looks healthy, and, things look excited for the season.
Very cool. Speaking of the off-season happening right now, the rookie minicamp, it's beginning May 10th, and what did you take away from from your training as a rookie last year that you think the young guys could take away coming in this year?
Guys should just try to learn as much as possible, and look to the old guys that are on the team and guys that are around them in their room and other rooms that are on the team, just to help them understand what it takes to to play in the NFL and how to take care of your body, just the little details.
Speaking of the off season, I'm sure you were very aware of the NFL draft. They added Tyler Eifert in the first and Giovanni Bernard in the second. It was very offensive heavy. What are your thoughts on that draft and expectations moving forward?
I think it's a great move to get two guys that can help the offense out tremendously and do good things for us. And I know from experience of playing Giovanni, he's a very talented running back. He has a lot of ability, great playmaker, and he's going to help us out a lot. And just seeing film on Tyler, he's a phenomenal tight end who play inside, outside, in the backfield. He does a lot of things, so he's definitely going to help us out a lot.
Very cool, very cool. With these guys that are coming in, you've got Giovanni Bernard and Tyler Eifert, as well as the guys who are currently on the team. What do you view being your own role in the offense for the upcoming season? Last year we saw you lined up in the slot on the outside. We saw you at the tailback position. Where do you feel more comfortable, or where would you prefer to be utilized?
I feel the most comfortable on the field, and it really doesn't matter where, I'm doing anything I can to make sure, the offense is moving at chains and being productive and, getting an end zone.
Don't forget quarterback. We all want to know, are we going to see more of you at quarterback next season, given how effective that was against Washington last year?
I don't know. It's up to, Coach Gruden and, Coach Lewis, to implement that offense if they want to. And, I'm willing to do it. If they don't, then, we can find other ways, to get the ball moving.
Absolutely. And I certainly wouldn't mind that, because I got to tell you, Mohamed, that was a beautiful throw in the Washington game last year.
Well, thank you. I appreciate it.
Absolutely. Chris, what else you got for Mohamed?
I think that's about it. I mean, if he wants to, not a lot of guys like to do this, but if he wants to give us a prediction for next season on how the team's going to perform, we would love to hear it.
From what I see, I know we're going to perform well. It's all about us, putting it together when, training camp comes along and OTA. So, you never know. But from what I see, I know, guys are working hard, and we should fare well this year.
Very cool.
So,
good.
Maybe a third straight playoff appearance in a row?
You never know. We'll see. We got to see how things play out. We got the tools to do it, so it's just about us, putting it all together.
Very cool.
That's awesome. Hey, man, really want to thank you for for coming by and joining us here on Bengals Central, and giving us your 2 cents on your progression through your off season and insight into the coming season. We really appreciate it, and we wish you the best of luck for next year.
No problem.
Thank
you, guys. No, thank you.
Ladies and gentlemen, was Mohamed Sanu, Bengals wide receiver. He was a nice, laid-back guy. He was fun to talk to. I really enjoyed having him on the show, actually. He seems like a very intelligent guy. He seems very, goal-oriented and team-driven. And, you really got to like that in the Bengals locker room right now compared to what it was, years past with, certain, divas that will go unnamed right now. I liked what he had to say, really, and I'm excited for him this year. I love his versatility, all the spots that he can line up on offense, and how he's going to be able to contribute in 2013. I really do think he's going to be a big part of the Bengals offense.
I agree. I think he's your man across from A.J. Green, and, he's interchangeable with Marvin Jones in the slot. And, that little versatility I kept pushing for with him at quarterback, hopefully we'll see some more of that. I think, he flashed it last season until he got hurt. I think he's your most productive receiver, not named Green.
You're absolutely right. Well, Chris, hey, that was fun, man. We should do this again sometime. What do you think?
Well, we might have to.
All right. So we'll be coming at everybody weekly. Why don't you let everybody know what's up with us coming up in the future, Chris?
Absolutely. Well, first of all, thanks for tuning in to our first ever episode of Bengals Central Podcast on the Pro Football Central Radio Network. We're looking forward to continuing to bring you the best Bengals coverage we can provide each week. Don't hesitate to contact us on Twitter with, any questions, comments, or requests for the show. For Mr. Sean O'Donnell, I'm Chris Rowland, and thanks for tuning in. We'll see you next week. Who Dey?
Who Dey?
The following podcast is a part of the Pro Football Central Podcast Network. Check us out at ProFootballCentral.com.
Tonight is back in the orange and black. See the natty on the map, baby, tell me where you at. In the jungle, who they bringing it back to the jungle. And the game day, yeah, the jungle's back. Got the natty pack in the orange and black. We're stacked to the track, so I'm back behind long work, chugging down cases. And a can brewed in 88. Who Dey? Super Bowl, spirit of the icky shuffle. Feel it rumble through the king of the jungle. Thunderous roar, he will soar across the river to the Newport shore. The Fountain Square, the great American ballpark. Down at the banks above the riverfront graveyard. The Paul Brown Stadium, the night is awake. And then we're making a statement to the rest of the nation. Cincinnati's back in the orange and black. See the natty on the map, baby, tell me where you